United States, Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world, engaging all Dominicans home and abroad on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station. The
Good evening. Good evening to you at home or in your vehicle. If you are on the road or at work or listening on the radio or on the internet in Dominica or abroad, thank you so much for choosing Q95. This is the Global View on Q. A very, very warm welcome to all of our Q family listeners at home and globally. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, 28th October 2025, the 41st Tuesday of 2025, in fact, and it's 8 p.m. in the studios of Q95, the big station. We're live on our radio frequencies on QTV. Please follow us on Facebook and on YouTube at Q95 FM Radio. Share the live, like our pages. Our on-air phone numbers are on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Get the latest breaking news and reviews on Q95 because you know it's true if you hear it on Q. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, love, peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. It is our 41st Global View on Q show for 2025, and we continue to engage with our local, regional, and global Q family listeners and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. My co-host, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, who guests tonight, UWP Team Dominica leader, Dr. Thompson Fontaine, former Dominica UN Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, and we may be joined a bit later by Attorney Gabriel Christian. Tonight, in light of the U.S. aggression against Venezuela in Caribbean waters, a so-called zone of peace, we will discuss peace in the Caribbean, peace in our time, and peace in Dominica. I will have a few questions. What is the peace that is being touted in the Caribbean? Is there peace in the Caribbean and in Dominica? Do our leaders have the moral right to claim that they want peace in our region? Should peace be sought at the expense of justice? Is this show of naval force by the United States an attempt to counter the presence of the Chinese in the Caribbean? Is this really a new war on cocaine, or is it a move towards regime change in Venezuela masked as a war on drugs? There will be implications for the Caribbean region, nonetheless, from this U.S. war on drugs, and we will talk about these implications. But can we condemn the U.S. actions against Venezuela and ignore China's actions in Tibet, neighboring islands, and other countries? So, as I always say, thinking forward towards 2028 or to Dominica's 50th anniversary of independence, what are the people's expectations for their well-being? Are they satisfied with the current conditions and lack of economic and social progress? We look forward to the suggestions of our panel, our listeners, callers, and viewers on YouTube and Facebook on the topic in light of the U.S. aggression against Venezuela, Caribbean waters, a so-called zone of peace. We ponder on peace in the Caribbean, peace in our time, peace in Dominica, and what needs to be done to move beyond these 25 years of economic stagnation and oppression and away from dictatorship ahead of our 50th anniversary of independence. Justice Dr. Irving Andre, UWP Team Dominica leader Dr. Thompson Fontaine, former Dominica UN Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, and a little bit later, Attorney Gabriel Christian, they will all share their ideas on the topic ahead of our 50th anniversary of independence. So, as usual, we invite you, our Q family and friends of Dominica, to help us give our usual huge shout out and big thank you to our farmers, healthcare providers, frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, and public and private sector patriots and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. And as I always say, we welcome each and every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Cue. We embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, in every community at home, in Dominica, in the region, and globally. Thanks to Sherwin for keeping us on the air. Thanks to Lambi and the console, directing the traffic as usual. We will take your calls. As you know, the people's voice is always a priority on Cue and also on the Global View on Cue. So call us anytime during the show, and Lambi will signal us when you call. I co-host, guests, and panelists will expand and deliver on their own ideas during the discussion. Let me say, as I start, that our thoughts and prayers go out to Jamaica, now facing the catastrophic effects of Category 5 Hurricane Melissa. I wish them as safe a passage as possible in the circumstances, and let's hope for as speedy a recovery as possible with the support and assistance of the world community of nations and institutions. So I go now to Justice Dr. Irving Andre for his opening comments on the topic in light of the U.S. aggression against Venezuela in the Caribbean waters, a so-called zone of peace. We discuss peace in the Caribbean, peace in our time, peace in Dominica, what needs to be done to move beyond this 25 years of economic stagnation and oppression and away from dictatorship ahead of our 50th anniversary of independence. So Dr. Andre, let's get the ball rolling.
Let me say good evening to your listeners. Let me say thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. Let me recognize the presence of Ambassador Gregoire, Dr. Thompson Fontaine, Lambi, Gabriel Christian, who will make his appearance showing, and all your loyal listeners who are tuned in to this program. Hopefully, I'll be able to add something to the dialogue. I should indicate that much has been said. But though much has been said, all has not been said. The fact of the matter is, when we speak about peace within our times, or peace in the region, we must ask ourselves fundamental questions. Peace for whom? Where is that peace supposed to be hidden? Under what rock? In what cave is that peace within our region hidden? And in speaking about this, the Ambassador Gregoire, in a number of different presentations on Matt's program, has given the context in which this U.S. action is being taken. He's talked about the history of U.S. aggression and intervention in Latin America and in the Caribbean. He's talked about the fight, the global fight for oil resources. He's talked about the battle for supremacy being waged by Russia, China, and the United States. He's also talked about what's happening in Venezuela. The fact of the matter is, what right do we have to feel sorry for Maduro? Is this the Maduro who openly stole the last elections? Is this the Maduro who's persecuting his opponents? Is this the Maduro who is applying to the Supreme Court of Venezuela, stacked with his cronies, to take away the citizenship of Venezuelans born in their own country? Is this the Maduro who has set a patent for discriminating against anyone who opposes his government? Is this the Maduro who has disappeared descendants in his own country? So if in fact this is the same Maduro, I can tell you, we should shed no tears for him. Is this the same Maduro who is plotting to invade a country called Guyana? Why? Again, to grab a bigger pile of the oil reserves of that country. So make no mistake about it. In my respectful view, he is not worth fighting about. Not an inch, respectfully. Because what's happening, what he is doing, unfortunately, is setting a pattern for other would-be dictators within the region to follow his example. Obviously, the U.S. does not come into this fight with clean hands. Ambassador Gregoire has shown that the U.S. has a history of intervention in the islands. Make no mistake about it. This is the reality that we face. Whether it's on account of trying to grab the oil resources of Venezuela, whether it's on account of trying to stop the drug trade, whether it's on account of besting Russia and China, insofar as the Western region is concerned. All these factors may have played a part in the US actions as we speak. But let's be clear, the scourge of drugs in the Caribbean is something which threatens the well-being and the peace of these countries. Trinidad had over 600 murders last year, and we're talking about egregious acts of murder. We're talking about kidnapping. We're talking about killing without any distinction, whether it's women, whether it's children, whether it's officers, whether it's court officers, whether it's lawyers, killing recklessly with no regard for life and limb. This is, to a significant degree, the result of the importation of cocaine into the region. We cannot hide that reality. But we felt the effects of that reality right here in Dominica. Within the last 72 hours, 2 persons were found dead. And it's not because of spontaneous combustion. It's not because of natural causes. They were found dead because their lives had been taken on account of murder, quite frankly. And we have seen evidence of this. A major shipment of drugs, is it 1,700 pounds, if I recall correctly, of cocaine discovered within our region, within the parameters of Dominica? What about the type of killings that we've seen in various communities, most attributable to the pernicious effects of cocaine importation? So when we talk about peace within the region, so are we not to talk about these things? Are we not to talk about the effects of drugs, of cartels, of drug rings wreaking havoc on the body politic in Dominica and elsewhere? But when we speak about peace, what about the whole political dimension of that topic? These Caribbean leaders, they are recklessly and willfully blind to what's happening in their neighboring islands, and they're blind deliberately so, because they have an attitude which can be summarized, you know, the 3 monkeys: I don't see, I don't hear, and I don't talk. They turned a blind eye to what's happening in Dominica. They turn a blind eye to the persecution of persons opposed to the government. They turned a blind eye to cynical, illegal attempts to rig elections. They turned a blind eye to attempts to set up members of the opposition. They turned a blind eye to police brutality when people are exercising their right to peaceful demonstration, as occurred on March 19th, 2025. But these leaders are the same people who talk about peace in our region. They want peace, but they don't want justice. They don't want anyone ratting on what's happening in their neighbor's backyard. And for those who speak of peace, let me ask them one question. One question. Let those who are without sin cast the first stone. So those who embrace peace like a long-lost relative, if you look closely into their backyards, you will see a hornet's nest, a Pandora's box of illegal activities directed to one simple purpose: the neutralizing of anyone opposed to the regime. And yet these are the champions of peace in the Caribbean. Explain that to me. How can they be the champions of peace within our region? The peace that they want is a peace which enables them to do anything they wish, to perpetuate themselves. And we have seen examples or evidence of this. We have seen the whole sham process of reconfirmation at locations which all too often are within the party local headquarters in some constituencies. How pernicious can that be? You're going to confirm, but you're going into the premises of the ruling party to confirm. One young man gave a very poignant story about the way in which his name was changed for one purpose, to ensure that to the extent that he is not voting for the political directorate, his vote would be neutralized. But these people are pontificating about peace, whether in Barbados or in other countries. So many of these Caribbean readers needs a dose of not repentance. They wouldn't repent about anything. They need, quite frankly, to examine their own consciences in terms of just why they're talking about peace within a region when in many of these individual countries, there's no peace. The peace that they're interested in is a very narrowly defined state of affairs that enables them to do whatever they wish in their respective countries. But in Dominica, it's worse, because the political directorate seems to have the air of the Barbados Prime Minister and the cynical use of the RSS for one central purpose: to perpetuate itself in power. Whether it's by tear gas in a village on the very eve of a general election, whether it's by intimidating persons opposed to the political directorate, whether it's in terms of carrying out well-organized or well-advertised a gun program, whether it's receiving only 6 guns or getting a stash of money, no one knows where it came from. These measures do not address the cause of the destruction of the peace in Dominica, because they do not deal with the root problems, a mentality and mindset which tells perhaps the most vulnerable young black males in Dominica that if you support the right cause, you can get away literally with murder. So these folk have no right whatsoever to talk about peace in our region. Did they talk about peace when Maduro was threatening to invade Guyana? Did they talk about peace when Maduro was making sure that his opponents disappeared, many of them without a trace? Did they talk about peace within our time when Venezuelans were being forced to leave their country, not because they had violated any criminal laws in the country, but because they had the audacity to oppose what was happening in their country? No comment, nothing to say. Why? Because they all enjoy the largesse. They enjoy the financial bonanza from Venezuela, which blinded them to all the transgressions that occurred in that country, which these transgressions eliminated any peace that we can even talk about. How has Petrocaraíbe benefit Dominicans except for a selected few? How has the $9 or $10 million given by someone called Chavez to the Calinago territory, how has the Calinago territory benefited from that largesse? They haven't even seen a dime, quite frankly, from it. You see? So this whole question of peace is one of expedience. It is being brandished as a shield, or even as a sword, to be quite frank with you. But you look beneath it, you will see that it doesn't address the violence which is endemic in many of these countries, violence precipitated by politics, violence precipitated by an obsession to remain in power at any cost. Whether or not I agree with President Trump is not an issue here. What is at stake is what is the response, or what are the responses of Caribbean leaders in terms of that overarching violence that is eating away like a cancer at the societies in each of these islands, some more and some greater. But that's exactly what it is doing. And to the extent that most of our cocaine comes from South America, how should that be something that we should turn a blind eye when it's causing so much havoc? That's the question. I'm not here to defend any American leader. I'm here to defend the region's people, those who stand up for democracy, those who stand up for independence. And today is October the 28th. Within 5 days, we are celebrating our national independence, Gasol. And yet every major construction initiative, who does it? Who is controlling of it? Foreign persons. Dominicans are sidelined, but we are celebrating independence. Even with the World Creole Festival, Dominican players are lucky to get 10,000 EC dollars, let's say American dollars, out of their performances at the festival. How does that compare to some of the foreign acts over the last 3 days? You tell me. 1.8 million or 2. Hundreds of thousands to others. So Dominicans have been relegated in virtually every sphere of existence to second-class status. How many people had to hawk or sell their tickets which they got free because of political patronage just to buy a loaf of bread or a pound of sugar? What about those who work day in, day out? You have bakers, for example, in that before that hot oven, wood-fired oven, sweat dropping from their foreheads, earning a basic living with no assistance whatsoever. And the wealth of the country is being frittered away. That is violence against Dominicans. But no one wants to talk about those things. C'est Venezuela lo nole. C'est Venezuela lo noble palicot. Trump, Gasol. Trump is not the issue. Trump is not the problem. The problem lies within us. The leadership that we tolerate. The leadership that is castrating the development of the island. And many of us do nothing, we see nothing because we get a little stipend, we get a little handout here or there. That is the violence that we should be concerned about. Don't talk about peace in our region when you have no respect for peace whatsoever. We need a moral shakedown. A reminder that, quite frankly, it's the welfare and well-being of the people, whether it's Dominicans or St. Lucians or Trinidadians or others, that should be our primary focus. Because these are the folks who are affected or afflicted by the malady of violence within their respective territories. And yet we do not seem to be concerned about that. We're concerned about other things. Let the Caribbean region be the zone of peace, but peace for whom? Peace for the man on the street? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. It's really remarkable opening remarks there. Crispin, as I go to you, I believe in order to contextualize this American aggression in the Caribbean Sea against Venezuela, I imagine you can see what Trump is doing, the president of the United States doing. I imagine that in order to really contextualize this, we'd have to go back to Trump's first term in office. So maybe could you bring us up to speed on put all this into context for us and to bring us up to where we are today and what it is that we're likely to be facing in the region, well, in the not too distant future.
Yes. Well, good evening, Mr. G, and Thank you for inviting me as a panelist tonight on this Global View program, which is quite a dynamic topic and evolving as we speak. Let me recognize your co-host, Dr. Irvin Andre, and my fellow panelists, Dr. Thompson Fontaine and Gabriel Christian when he joins us. And of course, I salute Sherwin Norris, the engineer, and Lambi at the console. And I want to say good evening to the many listeners of Q. I just want to use the opportunity to call out a frequent listener of Global View and Matt in the Morning. Her name is Miss Helen Richards of Buetica. She just recently celebrated her 95th birthday in New Jersey, and I was pleased to be in attendance, and I know she's listening tonight. So
well, congratulations to her on the
yes,
95th
yes,
anniversary.
indeed.
Yes. Very well done.
Mr. G, I you know, it's a dynamic process that's on the way, and every hour that passes, new things are happening. I just wanted to give, before I go into sort of the context that you want me to lay out, I wanted to just tell the listening public of the latest developments in the last 2 days. One, that Venezuela has suspended a gas deal with Trinidad and Tobago after the U.S. warship USS Gravely docked in Port of Spain on Sunday. And today the National Assembly in Venezuela declared the Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister persona non grata, meaning that she can't travel to Venezuela anytime soon. And Trinidad is considering mass deportations of Venezuelans who are undocumented in Trinidad. And that there's a memo of the foreign ministry that was circulated today. Of course, we've had a total of 13 strikes on small boats, resulting in 57 deaths, strikes by the US Navy, which, interestingly, the Republican Senator Rand Paul has described as summary executions. And that's an issue that will be in the discourse for a while. The US President Trump has authorized CIA covert operations in Venezuela, including lethal operations. That means people can be killed, and the president has said just that, people will be killed. And President Maduro has called his actions an attack on sovereignty and claims that the US is fabricating a war to justify an invasion of Venezuela. So these are the most recent developments. We have 14% of the US Navy is now in the Caribbean. That's frightening to me. We have 6,000 sailors and Marines on board 8 warships to be joined very soon by the USS Gerald Ford and 5 destroyers in its strike group, along with 4,500 personnel. That's in addition to the 6,000 sailors and Marines. The USS Gerald Ford, is the world's largest aircraft carrier and is being moved from the Mediterranean Sea near Croatia to the Caribbean. And it was announced on Friday that it was moving to the Caribbean and it would take about 7 days. So I would say that by this Friday, that ship should be in the region, and anything can happen after that. I won't go into the details of the arsenal of weaponry, but it's quite an arsenal. This is not going to be a small war. This is going to be a huge war. We're talking about guided missile destroyers, amphibious assault ships, a guided missile cruiser, a littoral combat ship, along with a nuclear-powered fast attack submarine, and a special operations ship. How did we get there? How did we get here? Well, Mr. G, you started off by saying that the problems with Venezuela started under the first Trump administration, and that's correct. One might remember, those of us who've been following public events in the Caribbean and in the world will remember that there was a man called Juan Guaido. He was supposed to be the president, interim president of Venezuela, and he was one of the opposition politicians. He never ran for presidential office, but the Trump administration wanted to install him as the president. And interestingly, a number of countries in Europe supported him. However, in 2022, he had to run away from Venezuela, and the lady Maria, I don't remember her last name, but she just got the Nobel Peace Prize. She kind of succeeded Juan Guaido as the leader of the opposition in Venezuela. But one of the things that's important to understand about Venezuela, and I want the Dominican public to kind of wrap their heads around that, is something I'm going to say, which probably they've never heard before, but that is, Venezuela I consider to be a neighboring state to Dominica, because Venezuela's territory extends to Bird Rock or Bird Island, better known as Isla de Aves, 80 miles of our west coast. And Venezuela has sovereignty over that sandbank. It's really a rock, not really an island. And so I say that when we think of Venezuela as Dominicans, we have to think of Venezuela as a neighboring country. We are probably closer to Venezuela than even Trinidad. So Venezuela is a neighbor to Dominica. Second thing I want to lay to rest, when many people think that Bird Island belongs to Dominica. Well, not quite so, because the major powers in the region, I'm talking about the United States, the Netherlands, and France, they have recognized Venezuelan sovereignty over Bird Island since before we were independent. So what gives us some stake there is, after the Law of the Sea Convention was passed in about 1976, the new regime of law in international law now created what's called exclusive economic zones. And under our exclusive economic zone on our west coast, Bird Island is in that 200-mile economic zone. So I just wanted to say that, and how that links with, how does Venezuela link with Dominica? The second thing is that's important to mention is that Venezuela was the first country that recognized Dominica diplomatically after we got independence in 1978. And they have also assisted us over the years. It's not just under the Chavez government that we received support from Venezuela. We did receive support from them during Miss Charles's government. And those of us who remember the housing scheme up by the prisons was funded by the Venezuelans back then in the 80s. Now, Venezuela, why this conflict today? Why are we in this boat? For several reasons, but I think that the most important thing to underscore is that Venezuela possesses the largest proven oil reserves in the world, surpassing Saudi Arabia. And since the middle of the 20th century, the US has viewed Venezuela as a very, very, very important prize, a country that they need to control. And it's largely driven by the oil, the thirst for oil in the United States. So that they viewed control of Venezuela not only in terms of just profits for the US energy corporations, but also for them to leverage global balance of power. If you have access to that oil in Venezuela, then your worries about the supply of oil to the United States is not a big one. Now, the United States, they touted them. I remember in that first Trump administration, he had this notion, and he touted it a lot: drill, baby, drill. And no concern for the impact of oil on the global warming. He doesn't. He thinks that's a hoax, and so he really believes in oil. He's not very embracing of renewable energy, and so during the time that he was president, they were talking about how America is awash with oil. But what happened there was that oil they were talking about is what we call shale oil. That's the little bit of oil left in the rocks of where oil used to be. They have sucked that all up. So they really have to start importing. And that's why he's very focused on a pipeline from Canada that would bring crude oil into the US. But they're looking very closely at the Venezuelan oil. Now, what happened at the end of that last century that I mentioned? We're talking about that century ended in 1999. Well, Hugo Chavez emerged as an elected leader of Venezuela, and one of the things that he said very early, that Venezuelan oil wealth must serve Venezuelan first. That's very important. That Venezuelan oil wealth, the oil wealth, must first serve the Venezuelan people. And he moved to do that. And he nationalized the oil industry. Now, let me say that it wasn't him to be the first one to nationalize the oil industry in Venezuela. That process was started by the president who was there in the 1980s, Carlos Andres Perez. He started to nationalize the oil industry, to do just what Chavez was talking about, that the wealth of the Venezuelan people must stay in Venezuelan hands. Well, Chavez was elected, and that was a nightmare for Washington, because he was very focused now on redistribution of wealth in Venezuela, and the oil income that was from the profits of PDVSA, the oil company of Venezuela, would now they would make the decisions about that, not corporations making those decisions anymore. And he continued vigorously the nationalization, completed it, and the Venezuelans came to control the oil industry. And then he started putting significant investments in education, in healthcare, in food subsidies, and housing initiatives. So for the first time in half a century, the oil wealth was funding improvements in ordinary people's lives. And for the American corporations, they saw that as really a problem for them, because they lost making money in Venezuela, and they're not happy about that. And some of them are the largest donors to President Trump's campaign, and they want their pound of flesh, and their pound of flesh is that oil. We have to take it. So that is one of the things that's driving where we are. The second dimension of all of this is that President Trump in the first term did put serious sanctions on Venezuela, and the Venezuelans found themselves in a very difficult position, that they couldn't get spare parts for the oil industry, and they couldn't buy a lot of technology. And so they turned to the Russians and the Chinese, and that has added another dimension. And I believe all of that weaponry we are seeing has a larger objective. And I don't want to speculate yet, but I think that there are some real concerns. The Russians, they give Venezuela military support. They have given them economic partnerships to weaken the effectiveness of U.S. sanctions. The U.S. has put a lot of sanctions on Venezuela, But with the help of the Chinese and the Russians, they have softened the impact of these sanctions and somewhat blunted their impact. So Maduro, he kind of works around all of these attempts to make him look bad, and so he has the support of both Russia and China. It's important also to say that Venezuela is I think is one of the most important countries in South America. But not only do they have oil, they have two other important resources which also the US needs. One is copper. They have significant copper, and copper is important in making electric cars. And then they also have large deposit of iron ore, for which, if they were to develop their iron ore, they could become a producer of steel. And when you're a producer of steel, you're a significant country. I think these two other resources are of interest to United States in the scramble now for what's called rare earth. Copper is one of those, and then you have other rare earths like lithium, which you need for making batteries for electric cars and for cell phones, microchips in cell phones. So there are a whole range of things, but we're not talking about rare earths tonight, but that's for another topic, Mr. G. From the way I look at it now is that we are at the point where there is going to be a military intervention in Venezuela, without question. The US would never marshal all of this arsenal of weaponry and to have it turn around and go back to the different parts of the world where it has come from. I believe what I see ahead is probably a intervention on land by the US, on both sea and land and air. And what that's going to do in the Caribbean could be problematic for life as it is. It could affect, for example, our cruise industry, because if there's a naval blockade in the region, ships will not navigate there. I can tell you the cruise ships are already saying, with that kind of presence of US naval forces in the Caribbean, they might not have their ships go there for this tourism season. We have the potential for refugees streaming across national borders. Already we had seen a big influx into Trinidad. I'm told that there were about 100,000 already Venezuelans who would move into Trinidad. Then they might, who knows, they might just cross into Guyana, because it's the same, it's just a land border there. They will stream into Colombia, and the southern part of Venezuela is Brazil. They might stream into Brazil. So we have the potential for a big refugee problem. And depending on how long this conflict is going to last, it could impact shipping from North America. Most of our food comes from United States. Most of the Caribbean countries depend on food from the US. Whether that would be affected, and I certainly would not advise anybody to go on a small boat around that region. Already we've had about 14 strikes against small boats, and the latest figure is that about 50 plus people have been killed in these small boats that have been just shot at by US Navy. So we on the cusp of a major conflict, Mr. G, and we got to pay serious attention to where we go, and it's going to rub off on the other countries in the region, and we'll talk about that. Yes, I will stop here for now.
Well, yes. When you come back, of course, I'll probably like you to go into a little bit more depth on the Russian presence, the impact of Russia's involvement in this whole conflict. But Thompson, let me come to you. I mean, good to see you again. I haven't seen you for quite a while. Hope you're doing well.
Yes.
Now, Thompson, with all of this background given by Dr. Andre and given by Crispin, the contextualization of all of this, and looking at the number of forces the amount of assets the U.S. has in Caribbean waters right now. I mean, how do you see us continuing talking about a zone of peace in the circumstances, and given knowing what we know about Maduro and Venezuela, knowing what we know about some of the islands in the Caribbean, right here at home, we can see attempts to corrupt our political process and to eliminate free and fair elections. I mean, how do you see all of this evolving? And what would be your suggestions going forward?
You know, thank you, Mr. G, and good night, of course, to Dr. Andre, yourself, Ambassador Gregoire, and Lambi, and all many listeners. And let me just say, just quickly to the Jamaican people, to Chile 4. It's a difficult time for them right now, and there'll be significant damage inflicted on this island, and it will be a changed place tomorrow. So we want to send out our prayers to the Jamaican people. The Caribbean as a zone of peace is a very interesting notion. And with that build-up, we've not seen anything close to it, because even when the U.S. engaged in invasion of Haiti and the Dominican Republic and even Grenada, that was nothing approaching this level of build-up. So already this notion that the Caribbean is a center of peace is all gone. But I still see a way out of this dilemma. Whilst it does appear as if that war is imminent, I suspect that behind the scenes there must be some ongoing discussions about the possibility of Maduro giving up and leaving Venezuela, going into exile. I suspect that must be on the table. And if that happens, then that could be one way of averting bloodshed, because it would be a bloody encounter. I mean, Venezuela, probably not as nowhere close in terms of strength of the military, but they would have gotten some assistance possibly from the Chinese and the Russians. So that could alter things a bit. But I think the fact that so much effort and so much weaponry has been brought to this theater shows the seriousness of the Trump administration in getting rid of Maduro once and for all. And that obviously, this whole thing plays out in the context of the drug war. And as was well put by Dr. Andre, we've seen how so many of our Caribbean islands have been impacted. A lot of the crime, the overwhelming majority of the crime in countries like St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Trinidad and Tobago, and even here in Dominica, the overwhelming majority can be linked to the trade in cocaine. And we've seen even Dominica is not immune. The recent seizure of cocaine here in Dominica, So one wonders whether or not by really attacking this in the way that they are doing it, whether or not that will have a significant impact on the rest of the Caribbean as far as the reduction in the drugs, although we may not be large consumers here, but certainly Dominica and other countries in the Caribbean have been known to be transshipment points. And so the question is whether or not that what we're seeing going on now, this attack on the speedboats by the U.S. military, which I believe is secondary to the real agenda of the U.S., whether that will have any lasting impact on our own situation. So that is something that must be taken into consideration, whether or not we're going to see a difference in our own crime situation, in our own, the whole drug situation that's going on in our countries. So that is something to look out for, but my main concern has been with the response of the Caribbean leaders. It is clear that Trinidad and Tobago has taken sides very clearly in support of the United States against Venezuela. And at the end of the day, we just heard today that the Venezuela vice president suggesting that they will remove any agreement that they have with Trinidad as far as the oil industry is concerned. And Trinidad benefited tremendously from cooperation with Venezuela as far as the refining of some of the oil and so on. That could have an impact on the Trinidad economy. We see now Guyana. Guyana has been strangely quiet, but they must be obviously probably thankful for what has happened, because it does appear as if Maduro would have invaded Venezuela at some point. He made no bones about it. He annexed, by announcing the annexation of the portion of Guyana beyond the Essequibo River, probably about 2/3 of the country. And it does appear that he was serious about, invading, because Guyana, while Venezuela is number one as far as reserves are concerned, Guyana is not too far behind. And the recent discovery of oil in that country means that there is a huge thing. So we have the issue of drugs, we have the issue of oil, and then we have the diplomatic response that we're seeing in the region. CARICOM has never been a very strong institution politically, so it does not appear as if that will have any lasting impact on the relationship between the countries. Bertha Shaw in Trinidad has been very clear that she's speaking for her country, not for CARICOM. No one else has spoken on behalf of CARICOM. Individual countries here and here has been voicing some tentative pushback, if you like, but I'm not seeing a concerted effort by Caribbean leaders to really come down on any one side or make any definitive pronouncements. And there may be obvious reasons for that. It is possible that some of these islands are worried about falling out with the United States so publicly. We have some islands in the Caribbean whose behavior has not always been in keeping with our democratic traditions. We have that here in Dominica, obviously, with the treatment of this government, the way they've treated the opposition, the way they've gone about prosecuting the whole democratic movement here in Dominica. And quite frankly, we see it now with the enrollment, with the confirmation process, almost as if they're already attempting to fabricate the results of any future elections by having a flawed confirmation process. So, we certainly do not have a tradition, as it were, although we had a tradition of democratic governance that has changed over the years. And I suspect that some of the worry has to do with what some of those leaders believe could happen in our own countries if they come out too openly in support of Venezuela. On the other hand, Venezuela must be feeling very peeved at these countries because they've gone all out in support of some of the islands through the PetroCaribe arrangement, for example, where Dominica has benefited. But not Dominica, a few in Dominica, as Dr. Andrew rightly said, has benefited tremendously from the PetroCaribe agreement. The whole agreement was supposed to benefit DOMLEC and benefit consumers of electricity, because the idea was the DOMLEC would be able to purchase this oil at a reduced price. That never happened. DOMLEC was made to pay the full amount, and the government turned around and ensured that the cost was passed on to the consumer. So it has not been subsidized as it was. We are paying this full amount, and that money, whatever that money is disappearing somewhere. We had a very important case where close to $200 million of PetroCaribe debt was forgiven under very strange circumstances. We are now learning that some of that money allegedly was distributed, because it's not like the debt was there, because we were not really incurring that debt, but it was put on as a debt because these monies, as I said, were being collected. So it does appear as if this money was distributed somewhere. And so you have all of those concerns around it, the issue of corruption, the issue of drugs, the issue of the posturing of Venezuela and the way they dealt with the opposition, and even the posture that Maduro was adopting, wanting to invade a neighboring country. It is also very interesting to know that when Maduro was being extremely boisterous and making those claims against Guyana, it is true that Ralph Gonsalves of St. Vincent and the Grenadines was able to jump in and attempt some trying to pacify matters and so on. But you got the sense that other Caribbean countries did not come out forcefully enough against the attempts of Maduro. All right, so it's very interesting to see now, with a larger bully on the scene, because that's what it is, it does appear that it will be no contest if the U.S. were to go to war with Venezuela. But my hope is that, that this can still be prevented. Obviously, if war breaks out, it will have implications for us here in Dominica. It will have implications for the rest of the region, obviously. And so one would hope that, cooler heads prevail, and that at the end of the day, there is a resolution to the crisis, but not through the use of brute force. And that is what we would hope. But, in concluding my opening remarks to this discussion, I would sincerely hope that the government, that the governments of the region really, put the interests of the people first. At the end of the day, you might want to choose sides in this conflict, but ultimately that decision should be guided by what is best for the people of the region, what is best for the people in the islands. And so that is something I hope our leaders, as they make pronouncements, as they plan, as they discuss, that they will ultimately decide at the end of the day, we want to see what is best for the interests of the people of the region and what is best for our people. And based on that, they'll be able to decide or make pronouncements with regard to the current crisis. The other thing I would say in closing is to hope that this crisis is not protracted. It is not good for the region, obviously. When people think of the Caribbean, they think of paradise, they think of sun and sand. They don't conjure up images of bullets flying and so on in the region. And it'd be good to keep that image, and we're hopeful that in all of this, that will be preserved in the Caribbean region.
Yes, thanks a lot, Dr. Fontaine, for that. And Dr. Andre, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but I want to go to Lambi first to give out the numbers so our listeners and viewers can call in and have their say in what we're doing. But when we come back on the other side of that brick, I really want to ask you to comment on the fact that all these islands, maybe their mouths are shut because they're all involved in ALBA. And remember that Dominica was the first island, I think, to join ALBA. I think Dominica persuaded many of these other islands to fall in line and to join ALBA. So we can explore that as well. But certainly any outbreak of war in the Caribbean would create some serious setbacks for the economy of the islands in the Caribbean. So Lambi, give out the numbers and let's see if the listeners want to have their say in what we're doing tonight.
The Global View and Q. The numbers for calling in are as follow: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. Those are all local numbers. The overseas or international number is 305-432-9624. Let me run those one more time. 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, and 305-432-9624. Back to you, Mr. G.
Okay, so let me just before I go to Dr. Andre, let me just welcome all these people who are with us, who've joined with us on Facebook and on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining with us tonight. We can see your comments there that you're making on Facebook. Dr. Andre, as we said, as Crispin and Dr. Fontaine so eloquently put this, I mean, war is a terrible thing. I mean, we've seen the devastation in Gaza. We've seen the devastation in Ukraine. We've seen what happened in Grenada long ago. And we've seen what has happened in Cuba and in some of the other islands around. Let's face it, war is no good for this region. And it seems as if the U.S. is bent on going into something with Venezuela. Your thoughts?
You're absolutely correct. But there are different types of wars. There also was a war on drugs. There's also the effects, the cumulative effects of drugs on small island economies, the devastation, the ruin of many, the lives of many, not just young people, the whole health implications of untrammeled use of the white substance which is not indigenous to the Caribbean. that is causing a slow, lingering death to many of the communities and societies in the Caribbean. So should we not be concerned about that type of war also? Should we not be concerned about the slow destruction of our communities on account of the use of this pernicious drug? Here's what responsible governments in the region should say or should have said at one point or the other. Irrespective of ALBA, express genuine concerns about this influx, this infestation of cocaine on these small islands, the cost on the lives of the economy, of the people, the loss in productive hours, the cost of healthcare, for example, the cost in terms of the social fabric, with young people fighting with others, shooting them indiscriminately for the most minimal of slights. What about that type of war that is destroying our country? Have you heard one member of this ALBA, whatever you want to call it, express concerns that the sending countries should do more to stop that war? The war which is eating at the heart of these small Caribbean islands. Have you heard one of them express concerns that they cannot survive as a democratic country with this steady influx, with speedboats with 3 engines, speeding over the sea, with a focused destination, which is the Eastern Caribbean? Have you heard one Eastern Caribbean country voice publicly that concern? Or have they hidden behind the veil of so-called friendship? They were friends. The Americans had a saying in the 1940s regarding a particularly vicious dictator in the Dominican Republic called, if I recall correctly, Trujillo, Rafael Trujillo. The American president, one American president said of this fellow, he may be an SOB, but he is our SOB. So are the Caribbean countries willfully blind because they believe that Maduro may be an SOB, but he is their SOB? Therein lies the hypocrisy. Therein lies the problem. They are not taking a stand on principle or on morality. They are taking a stand on self-interest. They are taking a stand on expediency. And who is suffering, my friend? Those who cannot afford to send their children abroad for medical attention. Those who cannot afford to send their children to school on their own dime. Those who have to depend on the political directorate for food on the table. So it's again the poor people who are feeling the brunt of that war. The war which Caribbean countries are blind to.
Irwin, can we take a call? Lambi, go ahead.
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Oh, we lost that call? All right. We lost that call, Lambi?
Because when you go close, I don't know what is seeing on the screen.
Caller, please go ahead. You're there. I know you're there.
You sure?
We're listening.
The caller is not listening to us. All right, Dr. Andre, just go ahead. Maybe the caller will call back.
Yes. So my point is simply this. The Caribbean countries should take a principled stand in terms of what is happening in the Eastern Caribbean. Yes, they're right to express concerns regarding the effects of the militarization of the Caribbean and open blown warfare. But they should not stop there. They should not make pious proclamations about the Caribbean being a zone of peace. Why don't you go tell the Salisbury people, you are in a zone of peace? Huh? Why don't you tell the March 19th, 2025 persons who were arrested, some of them who were brutalized, who were charged under a piece of legislation whose genesis can be found way back in 1715? Why has there not been any pious proclamation about these acts, which are the very antithesis of peace in our region? Why should we be selective about talking about peace? These Caribbean leaders, quite frankly, you know, these ostriches, to be quite frank with you. You know what the local folk would say? You know the old saying that it is not the person who stole the egg who is the bad person necessarily, but it is the person who said, Mila, there it is. When someone is beaten up on the street, it's not just the person who did the beating who is responsible, but the person who shouted, Mila. So we can take no confidence in our leaders in terms of this latest crisis that is ready to swallow the region. In fact, in my respectful view, to a significant degree, they are very complicit in this difficulty because they have, although their societies have been plagued by the whole phenomenon of drug and drug abuse, and the fact that we all know where the drugs are coming from, they have done nothing because they get some money from Venezuela. And there's nothing like money to make your mouth shut. That is part of the problem that we face in the Caribbean.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Andrew Lamb. You want to take a call?
Yes, caller, are you still there?
Yes, Lambi, I am still there. Gentlemen, I say praises, thanks, blessings, and glory to all those who have sacrificed their personal safety and security, trying to elevate mankind to humanity. Gentlemen, blessings to you all.
Yeah, blessings to you too.
I give thanks. When I take a good look, through the years, I've educated myself by listening, reading, asking questions, and all of that. Is it coincidental that we are hearing, then they say it is not true, it's a rumor, which is not true. In St. Vincent, a set of drugs, they catch a set of drugs, then they say the Trinidadian soldier that tell that to some, if it's Washington Post or the New York Post or whatever, it is a lie. But within the same week, we get how many pounds of drugs in Dominica worth millions of dollars? Could it be that the CIA realized we are dealing with criminals in the region, a lot of them, Dominica is no exception, and maybe bait to them? Because there was not one arrest. They just found the drugs magically, and that's why I was telling Matt, why not they inviting or requesting for the U.S. to come in and take that drugs, because the drugs will be redistributed. I wonder how much of it that remains. I wonder how much of it that remains, and the hypocritical factors into the equation of unity, Koshoni. You have former Caribbean leaders consolidating the effort to talk about a zone of peace when they have the RSS come in and shoot Dominicans and tear gas them. Even the own Manikou gang and Abolo gang we have in Dominica, when Black Montserrat unleash them on the people of Dominica, they have a thing saying they does not interfere in each other's politics. It's a sovereign affair or sovereign state, and all that level of hypocrisy. How magically they're hearing now and they're seeing. When Venezuela was threatening Guyana, there was not a pin drop. And all of a sudden, we are talking pertaining to America wanting to invade, or whether it is under some false pretext, Venezuela. But where is the unity prior to America threatening to intervene? Where is the unity? So in conclusion, I'm saying even Castro, all these leaders, some leaders that are doing well diplomatically on the world stage, the news might cover some of them. but secretly they're robbing the country blind. Castro was not a saint. You know, scary to self is close to the devil. Maduro and Chavez and all of them. You will find you go in these countries and you have people dirt poor, but they will take millions to buy friends and all of that. So I can't say too much about America, but I have a lot to. I know America. Why should you want to talk about the devil? You have to talk about the people pretending to be angels or saints and say they're almost in parallel with the devil. So it is sad to see where we are at. And I know you have Dr. Fountain in there. Dr. Fountain, desperate times call for desperate measures. And we allow the Independent and the Creole Festival, where you had a lot of maybe regional and international media people, and we did not do nothing. We did not do nothing to sound the alarm because their backs are against the wall. Now is the time to take the fight to them. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yes, thank you for that. Before I go to Crispin, I want to ask Dr. Andre to respond to this caller's remarks. And maybe Dr. Fontaine, if you're still with us, maybe you might also want to have a bite at this. Dr. Andre, your response to these remarks?
Well, I substantially agree with what Blessings is saying, to be quite frank with you. We cannot adopt, in my respectful view, a one-sided perspective when it comes to this most latest of threats in terms of the prospect of imminent invasion. But quite frankly, as I said, you know, this is not professional wrestling. One side is not good and the other side is bad. What we've had over the years is a reluctance by many Caribbean readers to speak candidly about what is happening in Venezuela. It's not America that is destabilizing the region. It is the Venezuelans themselves. It is the oppression of a Maduro. And we should not shy away from saying this. We should not hide behind any type of rhetoric and talk about American imperialism and so on and so on. That is an issue, but it is what has justified or caused the Americans to take the actions that they've taken. I agree with Crispin that it may all be pretextual, but we cannot ignore the fact that our societies are being ruined by the scourge of cocaine invasion, not importation, but invasion. And what is making it even worse is that in many of these islands, you have selective enforcement of the law. I would like anybody to challenge me on this, you know. Selective enforcement of the law. It is not every cocaine distributor or dealer who is arrested. You know better than I, that's not the case in Dominica. It's selective enforcement. So that we have one scourge destroying our country. And we have the compounding of that problem by selective enforcement. And who do you think is the biggest person or the biggest entity affected by that state of affairs? It's typically the expendable citizen, the one for which there is no cry of indignation, because there is unfortunately an incestuous link between poverty and criminality. And therein lies the problem. Some people are viewed as expendable. There will not be a hue and cry if they are arrested and thrown into custody, if their rights are not fully protected, and so on and so forth. I heard not long ago one of the Beagles or one of the acolytes say piously to Matt Peltier, the accused has to prove his innocence. Now, somebody told me that person who said that went to the Balahutang Law School. But what you have is a perversion of the law insofar as the enforcement of the law is concerned. And you cannot divorce all this from what is happening. We talked about Grenada, but what many of us don't say sufficiently, in my respectful view, is that Grenada, what happened in Grenada, what happened to someone called Maurice Bishop, the massacre gave the Americans the justification to take the action that they took. So we have to look at what's happening in Venezuela as a justification to give Trump a reason for doing what he's done. Nobody's saying that he's acting altruistically, but we have to be honest and say that Maduro has given the American president the justification for taking the actions that he took and for giving a platform to the Trinidadian prime minister to say, we stand with them because we are on the front line of that war, that assault on peace, what the drug infestation is doing to Trinidadians. As a leader, they have to be concerned about their own people, not about Caribbean politicians who conveniently talk about zone of peace while ignoring the assault on peace in their neighboring islands. We have to get rid of that type of double standard. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Andrew. You take a call, Lambi?
Yes, I hope the caller is still there. Caller, are you still around?
Yes, I am still around.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, I am waiting for all these former so-called prime ministers talking about zone of peace. Where the heck were they when foreign troops who are still in Dominica today, the so-called RSS, provoking, kidnapping, shooting Dominicans? Where were they? Where were they when that idiot in Venezuela threatened Guyana, threatened Trinidad? Where were they? And the prime minister's wife, who said she has a Navy SEALs and snipers, she should have been in jail. She should have been arrested because if the Dominica Opposition Freedom Party, United Party had said something like that, they would have arrested him. They had him running from Africa to Dominica, running from Africa to Dominica. For what? The terrorist should be in jail in a democratic country. I keep saying that. Kerry would be in jail, but Dominica is a democratic country on paper. But Dominica is a full-fledged communist party country right now. He dealing in China. You talk about flying flag. You go to the hospital, there are Chinese flag right next to the Dominica flag at a hospital. What the heck is that? They give you 2 pennies to do a job in a hospital, and then you have to put their flag there. Man, Trump, go ahead and do the job. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this call. Take another call, Lambi.
Yes, caller, please go ahead. Oh, we lost it.
We lost the call. Maybe the caller will call back in a moment. So when he calls back, he'll make us a signal. So we will take the call. Let me go over to you, Crispin. I mean, looking at the context of all of this, all of what this caller talked about, all of what Dr. Andre has mentioned about all this drug infestation in the region and the silence of the leaders of the Caribbean region on all of that, always destabilizing the economy and the society. We've seen the effects of the drugs on a lot of youth in Roseau. In fact, we've seen the deterioration there. Lamb, do you want to take a call before I go to...
Call back. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good night, Lambi.
Good night.
A good night to the entire panel to that discussion tonight.
Good night.
Gee, I listened from the time of the program, and I listened to Mr. Gregoire, the former ambassador.
Yes.
What's name again? Crispin Gregoire?
Crispin Gregoire.
Okay, but I want to ask him a question, because I want to say 2 things quickly. But I want to ask him a question so I can be accurate with what I'm trying to say. There's a video going around saying that Mr. Trump is saying to Americans from somewhere in November, nobody will go out and nobody go in. Is that true?
I haven't seen anything to that effect. But okay. The one thing that could happen is if there's a full-scale military intervention, the waters in the Caribbean could be blockaded. Okay. So, and then that could mean that flights in the region could be reduced. The airspace might be closed, so, but the Pentagon has not yet said that.
Well, thank you. I asked this question because there's something on my mind. I said, if that is true, I would have said to you tonight that I have an idea when that was going to stop. But since I'm not sure about this video, I'm going to leave it to rest. But I have a request to make on the program to Mr. Donald Trump. I am a very small fish, but I am requesting that he don't kill nobody, he don't no bloodshed, but just go in there and arrest Mr. Maduro. Anything that can happen, Dominica will get at ease. Even our electoral system will fix. Thank you, Mr. G, for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. Crispin, over to you.
Yeah. Well, Mr. G, you had said when towards the end of my my first round of presentation, you had asked me about the Russian presence in Venezuela, and I want to address that because
the Russian and the Chinese
and the Chinese, right? Well, you know, as I said, from the first term of Mr. Trump, he put a lot of sanctions on Venezuela because obviously they were not happy with what was going on with the elections there. And I mentioned about they tried to install Juan Guaido and all of that, and a number of countries that recognize his government, him as the potential president, but that didn't happen. But what did happen though, with the sanctions on Venezuela, now enters a good entry point for the Russians and the Chinese to the very things that were now denied Venezuela under sanctions. They began to provide it. So military support from the Russians and probably the Chinese as well. Economic partnership that would weaken the effectiveness of U.S. sanctions. And to give you a total picture, so where Washington had moved to isolate Venezuela, Russia has provided it with a lifeline, financing trade and arms. And that allows Caracas to resist Washington, right? So that's one. The second thing, the presence of Russian forces and advisors, it signals an erosion of U.S. monopoly over Latin America resources. And I'll tell you, at this juncture that we are in the world, there's a mad scramble for resources by major powers. And for the United States, they're looking for the resources for the technologies of the future and economies of the future. And that is, we're talking about renewable energy, we're talking about electric cars, we're talking about advanced weapons, missiles that you need rare earth, like lithium and other forms of rare earth, of which the Chinese have the majority of that. So on the specific to the Russian involvement, they provide arms sales like fighter jets. They've made available to the sold to the Venezuelans. Of course, the Venezuelans have money to purchase these things. So AK-103, we hear of AK-47s, but they have bigger guns, AK-103 assault weapons, rifles, as well as doing naval exercises and security cooperation. To give you a sense of the arms and equipment, Venezuela uses Russian-made equipment, including Sukhoi fighter jets with anti-ship missiles and S-300 air defense systems. That's for monitoring missiles coming across. It also purchased 100,000 AK-103 assault rifles, right? So that's 100,000 assault weapons. I mean, that's a lot of men on the arms. Then they have a naval presence in Venezuela. They have sent naval vessels to the region, conducting joint naval exercises with Venezuela. In 2019, they sent Tu-160 bombers to the country, a move seen as a show of support during a period of high tensions with the United States. And then most recently, this month of October that we are in Russia and Venezuela signed a new strategic partnership agreement that extends cooperation into security, energy, and other areas. Under military cooperation, the two nations have held joint military exercises. And in this same month of October, Venezuela activated its military forces and claimed it had 5,000 Russian-made anti-craft missiles in key defense positions amid the heightened tensions of the US. So it's not, Russia is the player in all of this. And I believe that all of this mounting of show of American hardware is because of the Russian. Now the Chinese, I don't have as much information, Mr. G, on the Chinese presence, except to say that China has been supplying Venezuela with technology. I don't know if in the security realm, in the military sphere, that they are providing weapons, but they're certainly there. They have invested in the oil industry of Venezuela, and so when we're talking about why is the U.S. doing all of this, as I've always maintained, it's not just for Venezuela alone. This is a wider conflict that involves three major powers. And that is where we are, Mr. G, at this juncture.
Well, let me ask you this before I let you go, Crispin.
Yeah.
The fact that the U.S. has amassed all these assets in the Caribbean Sea, I mean, just let's not forget that Cuba is done. You have this guy called the Secretary of State, who well, from the Florida, the
From
Cuban exile.
Rubio, yes.
Rubio, I'm sure they would love to do something about Cuba. Do you think that the U.S. might be contemplating while they're there, including something on Cuba as well?
It's something we shouldn't take off the table. You know, they had planned to do that back in 1961 when you had the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was a plan to blockade Cuba with Navy. We're talking about right now at least 12 naval ships in the region. As I said earlier, 14% of the U.S. Navy is in the Caribbean right now. That's a lot. That's a lot of weaponry. It's not unthinkable that they might want to try to invade Cuba too. Mr. Rubio, who's the Secretary of State, I call him the second most powerful man in Washington right now. Not even the Vice President is as powerful as him. Not only is he Secretary of State, he's also the National Security Advisor to the President. So he carries two titles. The only other person in the history of the US that has carried these two titles is Henry Kissinger. And you know how much power he wielded. So Rubio is emerging as a very, very important, powerful broker who has presidential ambitions as well. He's Cuban American. I think he would like to attack the Murcian attack on the Cuban regime. And that would be, I would call that a conflagration if that happens, because the whole region will be on fire if we go there. I hope we don't go there. But in the context that we are in the world, you have to understand, put all of this in the global context of a United States that doesn't have the kind of wherewithal in terms of influence in the world. They're now shifting to hard power. The fact that they closed down USAID, which is the soft power window of the United States, has been shut. So now we are dealing with hard power, and hard power means military might. So it's not. I don't think that even if the Caribbean leaders try to make an initiative at this point to try to get the Trump administration to rethink their thing, the Trump administration will say to them, you guys are complicit with Mr. Maduro. You know, especially the OACS. You know, I was looking at the ALBA countries, Mr. G, and I was surprised to see that the ALBA countries consist of Cuba, Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, and then the OACS. Because even in the CARICOM, the bigger countries of the CARICOM were not in ALBA. Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados never joined PetroCaribe. They were not benefiting from PetroCaribe. They were getting their oil. Well, Trinidad was the oil producer. Barbados said they had other arrangements, so they never joined PetroCaribe. When you look at ALBA and the Caribbean, it's the OECS countries. So really, I should say, though, however, about the Venezuelans, I think that President Chavez meant well when he came up with the PetroCaribe, and it was, but what the countries didn't understand, and that's the mistake that even Dominica made, and that was a little help to get you off oil, because the Venezuelans, they did two things. They displaced Trinidad as the major supplier of oil to the CARICOM countries. And they moved in with a package that said, look, I will sell you oil at a reduced price, and also we'll give you a loan. So you don't have to pay 100% for the oil. Pay me 70%, and the other 30% will give you a loan. You can collect that money, but you can spend it for social programs. So we got that. But that candy was too sweet for these islands, so they all remained dependent on PetroCaribe until such time when spare parts began to be a problem for the Venezuelan oil industry. And then PetroCaribe just declined. And today, PetroCaribe is not really functioning. So the countries were scrambling. They now had to go and pay in hard currency, whereas they were getting to pay only $7 out of every 70 cents of every dollar. They now have to pay 100 cents to whoever they're buying oil from. So, and it took Dominica 25 years to get to building alternative energy, and we're still not there. The plant hasn't opened yet, the geothermal plant. And even the geothermal plant opens, I should say, it's only a 10 megawatt. It's not going to solve Dominica's installed demand of 20 megawatts. I am a little appalled, Mr. G, that we didn't go for 100% renewable energy. We should have stopped importing diesel a long time for electricity. And, I know we have a Minister of Energy in Dominica who doesn't support solar energy. But solar energy is the cheapest form of electricity you can generate today. And with a small population of less than 100,000 people, we could have gone a combination of wind, solar, hydro, maybe and geothermal, and then have 100%. So we don't have to import diesel for electricity. But as it is, even when we open this geothermal plant, whenever it's going to open, we will still be importing diesel, which is unfortunate. And that's not the vision that Pierre Charles laid out. Pierre Charles had laid out a vision that by 2012, if he was still in government, they would have been off oil, and it was feasible to do. But now it's taken them 25 years and we still don't have a plant. So I think that the Venezuelans also were helpful after Hurricane Maria. They wiped out $100 million of debt. What did the government do with that money? I'd like to know, because they would have had collected that money over the years.
Crispin, I will want to ask you a question about the Israelis in terms of their involvement with the geothermal plant, and I want to put the same question to Thompson Fontaine as well, because what does that, what does that portend? I mean,
Well, Mr. G, sometimes it pains me, some road development approaches that our government has pursued, and one of them is that it's commendable that they did the geothermal, although I think it costs way too much. Good initiative, but will not solve our energy problem, because 10 megawatts cannot, we still have to import diesel. So what's the point, really? I was involved in the geothermal program from the inception. They won't tell you that. And the current energy minister behaves as though he started the geothermal program. Well, it was Pierre Charles' idea about the geothermal program, and he said to me, "Crispin, go and find the money." And I went, and I was able to raise 8 million euros for the geothermal program. And not only that, I got the government of Iceland to agree to Cooperative Dominica, and we signed the cooperation agreement where Iceland would be our technical partner. The moment they got rid of me, they scuttled that, and they went to New Zealand as their technical partner. And then they still had to use Iceland companies to do the drilling for them when the Iceland government, and pay for that. And the Iceland government, under the arrangement before, the Iceland government was going to contribute that as their contribution to Dominica, so they wouldn't have cost us anything to drill these wells. But anyway, where they drilled and where they're doing the plant at Loda is not the best place. Because if it's 10 megawatts resource you find, Dominica has over 1,000 megawatts of power in the ground from geothermal. And for you to tell me you're building a 10 megawatt plant, when you could easily have started with a 20 megawatt plant because the resource is there. And then I want to also say on geothermal, Mr. G, while I have the things, that I have a real problem with the government touting and beating their chest about what they've done with geothermal. I want them to answer one fundamental question. What happened in Soufriere with Mr. Digans, who used to be a manager at the National Bank? He and other Dominicans had a company doing geothermal exploration in Soufriere. And we've never heard about that. What happened to that? So when they're talking about geothermal, I want them to answer that question first. Tell us about what happened in Soufriere and why these people still owe the National Bank money they borrowed for that geothermal thing in Soufriere. So that is where we are. We're in a tight spot. And I'll tell you, if Mr. Maduro goes down, the US is now going to turn their guns around and looking at who's next. And I'll tell you, Dominica is right in the crosshairs. Why? We have a similar situation like what happened in 1983. And Dr. Andre, you might want to buttress me here, and that is, we have a parallel situation where an airport is being built. Back in 83, the airport in Grenada was being built by the Cubans with support from the Soviets. Today, that's an adversary of the US. And then today we see another airport being built in Dominica this time by the adversary of the United States, which is China. So I am beginning to be a little antsy about what could happen there. And anything after Venezuela, it's anybody's guess what's going to happen next, Mr. G.
Yes. But Lambi, you want to take a call?
Yes, let's try this call. Caller, you still there? Please go ahead.
Yes, good evening to you, Lambi, and good evening to the gentlemen on the panel.
Good evening.
I see that I had been ignorant of geothermal and what it was about before I started hearing a lot more about it in Dominica. And then I learned that when you drill a well, okay, after a certain amount of years, that well will clog up and you have to drill it again, drill somewhere else again. Now, the amount of millions it costs to drill one well, to me, what I learned is like it is not cost effective what they have done so far and getting only 10 megawatts. It is really doesn't make sense to have drilled one well because you still in the future have to go back and drill 1 and 2 and 3 more wells, and we never know what will happen with our Trafalgar Falls when all of those that are going to be drilled up there. So I really cannot understand if they're depending on only one spot up Trafalgar Way and not maybe trying to get something from Soufriere and maybe for us to get more than 10 megawatts, because I know Dominica needs more than 10 megawatts to light up the whole country. I believe with all the money that has been spent, we maybe could have given big portion, or maybe almost 3/4 of Dominicans solar energy and go that way instead of going drilling wells and so on. Good evening, gentlemen. That's my contribution.
Yeah, very good contribution as well. Lam, do you want to take another call? Oh, no, okay. Crispin, you want to respond to that, or before I go to
Yeah.
Dr. Mountain?
Well, the caller is right about the wells. What they did in Iceland is they drilled several wells across the country, and when a well gets not so productive, they open up another well. The thing is that what the Iceland engineers told me, we have 9 active volcanoes. And these, while they present dangers in their own right, because if we have a volcanic explosion, that's another hazard, right? But having said that, they're telling me that each of the volcanoes could generate up to 200 megawatts, each of the 9, and we're only drilling into one that's up in the Rosa Valley. But it's not just where the hot water comes out that you have the hottest steam reservoirs below ground. Sometimes where there's no hot water coming out there, no steam coming out there, and that's where the water is hottest. We have hot water fields all along even the west coast, going up to Clifton in the north, around Diablotin, in the area not far from Point Round. All of these areas have hot water fields. So every volcano has power in it. That's the point, Mr. G. So they're telling me, look, you guys have over 1,000 megawatts potential, maybe as high as 1,800 megawatts. That was why when we started the geothermal program, we were beginning to think about interconnection of Guadeloupe and Martinique. That's possible, but now, after 20 years, it's gotten so expensive to run a cable from Dominica to Guadeloupe and one to Martinique. We're talking about $400 million of investment for each cable. So then we lost an important partner in all of that geothermal. That Electricité de France pulled out. They said it's not financially viable and they're not going to put their money in it. So the thought of interconnection to me is very low. While we are waiting over 25 years to do geothermal, other technologies have come into the mix for producing electricity. So I don't think that the Martinique and Guadeloupe people are so interested in Dominica's thing, because their electricity company has pulled out from that arrangement, and I don't see. It's not a core interest for them, Mr. G. So,
okay.
I just the last thing I want to say on Venezuela. You see, I'm not one of those who's out to bash Venezuela too much, because they have done some good things for us as a country, as Dominica. They have helped us. They've helped the Caribbean, but they also have self-interest. You see, the one thing I learned in international politics, right, and that is, there are no permanent friends. There are only permanent interests. Countries act on their self-interest. And Venezuela saw an opportunity with PetroCaribe, and that was, they took over the market. Before, they were not the largest supplier of oil to the islands, but they took it over. They found a way to insert themselves and displace the Trinidadians. So they found the market, and all of our countries owe them money. As I mentioned, the 2 countries that didn't get into PetroCaribe is Barbados and Trinidad. So all the others have debt to Venezuela.
All right, thanks a lot for that. Dr. Fontaine, I was hoping that you would come in and make a few comments additional to what you've done from the beginning. I mean, on this zone of peace and on this U.S. aggression in the region, and also now on this geothermal initiative. Because
yes, certainly.
Yes.
Certainly, I would like to start with the geothermal initiative. I'm very disappointed, like Crispin, that we were not able to realize more gains. I remember having a conversation with Pierre Charles in before he died, and when we discussed this particular issue, at that time there was a lot of interest from the French in getting the connection, this underground cable, this marine cable that would supply those two islands with electricity. It was a very exciting proposal that would have created, hundreds of millions of dollars in generating revenue for Dominica. But unfortunately, Pierre Charles passed, and the current prime minister did not pursue it with the same diligence and the same degree of honesty that was requested at that time. And we ended up losing this. For me, and having studied this and having looked at this, I saw at the time, going back to 1998, that Dominica could have supplied power up the chain of islands all the way to Puerto Rico. That would have been a possibility. And imagine us as a Swahili being able to do this. We'd have been able to generate, 5 times the amount of money that's been generated now from the sale of passports. But again, the lack of foresight by this administration, the lack of I say honesty, and there's a reason for saying that, because we know that there was some requests made on the French authorities that they said they would have no part to deal with. So it is very unfortunate that we lost that opportunity. But even worse now, in our own situation, that we are only doing about 1/3 of our generation of electricity through geothermal. The level of investments that we've done into this area should generate a lot more than that. And I was looking at the case of Iceland, which is way ahead, up to 65% of their power needs through geothermal. All right, and I'm wondering whether we couldn't have something similar, at least 50%, and the others we look at solar and wind. So I believe that we've missed the ball on this through lack of commitment of this government, and it's very unfortunate. But given the unfolding situation with the U.S., I was very interested to hear the comments by Crispin as it relates to whether or not the guns that are now turned toward Venezuela, whether they'll be turned outward toward us at some point, and whether there is enough reason to look in that direction. That's a very interesting point of discussion, And the behavior of our government is truly atrocious, and you wonder whether or not there are discussions behind the scenes about what should happen to a country like ours, going back again to the experience of Grenada in 1983.
And one of the things, Crispin, in terms of the geothermal, wasn't a contract given to a foreign company to manage a geothermal project?
Yeah, Mr. G, I just realized I didn't address that, so I was going to come back to that. Yes. Well, interestingly, we have learned that the company that runs the plant in Guadeloupe, because Guadeloupe has a geothermal plant, they've had it for a long time, and this Israeli company called what's their name? Mr. G, you remember their name?
Is it Ozak or Oran?
No, it starts with
Oran, not Oran.
Oran, yeah, something like that. Their name escapes me, but they're in Loda. The interesting thing is that they're bringing no real financial investment into this. They actually come in to spend the money that the government was able to mobilize. The government mobilized a soft loan from the World Bank. They got somewhat of a soft loan from the CDB, and I know they got a $50 million credit from the National Bank of Dominica. So this company is not bringing any money. They're only bringing in management expertise, and they have a 25-year license. They'll be there till 2050. Now, that's a long time for a company that's not bringing any investment. So they're coming to spend our money. They now connect us to the Israeli governing structure. We are linked to Israel now. And, that's a worry. And then I heard the prime minister saying about oh, he's thinking about the idea of bringing 200 Palestinians to Dominica. Well, please don't bring the Middle East conflict to our shores. I mean, that's really what that would entail. And then more than that, Mr. G, I mean, if we're talking about bringing Palestinians to Dominica, has the government spoken to the Palestinian Authority? Because they're the only ones who are legally responsible for the Palestinian people, not the other states like Qatar or Jordan or Egypt. The Palestinians don't want these countries to represent their core interests. Their core interest is to have their own country, and I fully support them.
Yeah, but also,
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to comment on this, Also, it is incredible to me, talking about the arrangement with this Israeli company, that you spend over $100 million in exploration, basically sunk cost. You turn around, get $50 million, give it to another company that can then enjoy the benefits of 25 years. It makes absolutely no sense. And I don't understand what this government is doing. It would seem to me that the more logical thing to be, if you needed the expertise to run, that you pay management fees to this company, but you get the profits out of this enterprise for the next 25 years. So effectively, this company comes in, not having spent a dime, not having risked a dime, and they enjoy profits out of their country for 25 years. This is ridiculous. This is madness. Any financial person would squirm at this, but that is what this government has done. So I don't understand this. Probably, Crispin does or Dr. Andrew, but I certainly do not understand this.
Well, let me bring Dr. Andre into the conversation on this. Any thoughts on this, Dr. Andre?
Yes, let me say to Dr. Fontaine, it makes a lot of sense if you are getting back some of that money that you are giving out to this foreign company, whether under the table, whether under the coconut mattress, under whatever it is, it makes perfect sense. And the anecdotal evidence, the evidence of persons who are in the know, have indicated clearly that many of these foreign contracts makes eminent sense because one, the cost of performing the service is inflated, and two, there are persons who are benefiting personally and financially from some of these contractual arrangements. So to that extent, the Dominican economy is being stiffed. Persons are getting filthy rich on account of monies which, quite frankly, are passed surreptitiously, are deposited into mysterious accounts, as Zampoli once told us in a lawsuit against those involved in that hotel in the Cabritz area. There is an underground economy that is hidden and invisible to local eyes. But that underground economy is causing a few persons to become fabulously wealthy. And so what Dr. Thompson has said to the effect that it makes no sense, what appears to be an absurd contractual arrangement, quite the contrary. It makes a lot of sense. If your central purpose is to pocket significant sums of money at the expense of Dominican people. There's someone who was interviewed by Al Jazeera years ago. He was associated with Alireza Monfared. And what did he say? 90% for the boys and 10% for Dominicans. The answer, my friends, is not lying in the wind. It is right before our eyes.
Yes, thanks a lot. And Lam, you want to take a call?
Yes, let's see if he's still there. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, again, good evening, gentlemen, again.
Yes.
I see that we had put so much money into geothermal. There's a new thing called oceanic tech. We have the rough seas in the Carib territory area, the Marigot area, and the oceanic tech, we could take advantage of that instead of having to run lines from Roseau to the Castibus Marigot or the East Coast, we could take advantage of oceanic tech, and that would be a lot cheaper. You know, so I don't know if any of you all know or have heard about oceanic tech. Good evening.
Yes, I've heard about it. I have not done any too much research on it, so I'm not too familiar with how it operates. But I mean, certainly.
Well, it's a system that uses seawater, and it filters out the salt, and you can actually drink the water that comes from that. And that same water is used for electricity generation. And the Japanese have been the pioneer of that technology. I don't know what the financial implications are for an energy source for Dominica. It's something that we could do, but it might not be that cost effective. See, one of the things about Dominica is that it's a small country with less than 100,000 people. We must never forget that. And the second thing is that one of the mistakes we made after the Hurricane Maria, and we made that same mistake in 1979 with David, is we went back and we rebuilt the same electric grid that we had rather than decentralize it, so that if a hurricane hits and it breaks up let's say a mini grid in the Grand Bay district, Portsmouth would still have electricity. But where you have a situation where the grid is one continuous grid, and so it gets hit by lightning, it gets hit by hurricane, it's going to go down and the whole country loses power. So we could have decentralized the grid by having smaller grids and connect them. So if one gets hit, it does not bring the entire system down. But we didn't go that route. We went back and rebuilt the same old grid we had. Now with the geothermal, there's some change. But the problem is that with the geothermal, it's not going to produce enough power for us to meet our total needs. And you see, the future for me for electricity of Dominica is that we're going to have to use electricity to power vehicles. That's the future of Dominica's automobiles. See, all of these cars we are importing from Japan, that are old cars, it's time to stop that, because these vehicles, they have run their course already, and all they're doing is putting a spare parts burden on our country. We will have to go to electric vehicles, and I would say the first thing would be that all the buses, all the passenger buses need to go electric. But to do that, you will have to have charging stations for them. But, you know, that would be if we don't have to buy diesel or gas for our vehicles, that's a plus. But we don't have the power in place for that. The 10 megawatts, that's not going to cut it. That's not going to make it. I doubt if that 10 megawatts will bring any kind of reduction in your light bill. I don't believe it, Mr. G.
Well, I don't think so either. But I mean, it's we've come down to our time limit here, and I'm wondering whether Dr. Fontaine is with us. So if he's with us, he would want to give us his closing remarks. But if he's not with us, yes, you are with us, Dr. Fontaine. Could you?
Yes, certainly. I'm still here. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, in closing, I just want to say that I'm still hopeful that the seeming conflict will be resolved in a way that will not see the loss of innocent life. Because anytime you're talking about a full-scale invasion, you're talking about the loss of countless lives. And we certainly would not like to see that in the region. And hopefully, there is some, as I said, there are some back channels, there is some negotiation going on. I would probably see Maduro living and going into exile, which would spare the country of that type of warfare. At the end of the day, I think it's a good time for our leaders in the region to take stock of themselves and of what has been happening in their countries. It's an excellent opportunity for our own Prime Minister here in Dominica to consider what it is that he is embarked upon, including trying to, as we've seen, trying to muddy and sully the whole confirmation process, to skew it in a manner that will discourage the other side of persons who support us from confirming, hoping that way he can get a win. for the same type of manipulation that we've seen in Venezuela. So we're hoping that that's an opportunity for reflection, sober reflection on the part of our leader here in Dominica, and it is still baffling that we see those types of decisions. And again, it boils down to a level of corruption that is unprecedented that we've seen, and this naked pursuit of wealth that somehow ignores the broader interests of the population. So let's hope at the end of the day that we don't see the unleashing of this firepower on the innocence of Venezuela, and that this situation is resolved in a manner that we can all move forward and maintain the Caribbean ultimately as a zone of peace.
Yeah,
Thank you, and good night to all.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for that, for those closing words there, Dr. Fontaine. Crispin, your closing remarks?
Yes, Mr. G, I'm not as optimistic as Dr. Fontaine. My father always used to say to me, if I think it's if wishes were something, beggars would ride, or something like that.
If wishes were horses,
if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. Well, I don't believe. I think that I believe an intervention is on its way. The U.S. firepower is there, and people are going to die. There's no question about it. And even if President Maduro elects to step down, he will. He has this. $50 million bounty on his head. I just hope if he steps down, they don't indict him and try to bring him to the U.S. to face trial like they did to President Noriega, right? The question now is what happens next after Venezuela. That is a kind of a worrying thing. We talked earlier about whether Cuba would be in the crosshairs. We talked about the airport in Dominica becoming of bigger concern, and the last thing I want to hear is one of these days when President Trump might just say that airport being built in Dominica is a threat to U.S. security, and because it's being built by their adversaries. Similar situation to what happened in '83 in Grenada. So I am hoping for limited levels of bloodshed. The issue is that removing Mr. Maduro is not just him. It's the party that's been in power for the last 25 years in Venezuela. So it's not, you have the army in Venezuela, which is quite large. Whether they stage a military coup before the U.S. I don't know. Something is going to happen. We don't know what it is, but it's coming, and it will not be nice. So I just hope, this notion of the zone of peace, that zone of peace was shattered since the last invasion by the U.S. in Grenada. That zone of peace, is just a misnomer. We as Caribbean people, we would like that to happen, to be for the region, but we must never forget the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. When the U.S. said that they will not tolerate any powers in the backyard of the U.S. And now they're with the losses that they have experienced in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, and all of that, the U.S. is looking now at its neighborhood. They want to make sure that's intact, and any powers that come there, especially those two powers I mentioned, Russia and China, they're going to take steps to deal with it, and that's what you're seeing at play there, Mr. G. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Crispin. Dr. Andre, well, you have the final word.
Again, let me thank you, and let me thank my fellow panelists for that wonderful contribution that they've made. Let me thank your listeners, Lambie, Sherwin, all the above. This is a day the Lord has made. This whole problem of emphasizing that we are in a zone of peace can be dealt with very easily. Deal honestly, without fear or favor, to anyone who threatens the peace by eroding or eviscerating the democratic traditions of any particular country. Don't turn a blind eye to so-called friends who give us a few $1 million, which incidentally and all too often is never allowed to trickle down to those who it was intended. Deal honestly with the whole question of governance. Do not take the whole phenomenon of governance as something to be manipulated, something to be exploited to ensure that you are in power now and forevermore. Accede to the wishes of your people. Empower them, don't rob them blind. Do not fritter away the resources of your country. Do not give persons with very limited linkages to your island significant financial benefits, while you give your own citizenry pittances or virtually nothing. Take the issue of governance as a privilege, not as a possession. Treat people with respect and equality, not persons to be trod upon or to be exploited or to be taken advantage of. While you sing labor, labor, ensure that your people can go forth boldly, proudly, as they celebrate the accomplishments of their independence. Don't treat independence as a form of trivial pursuit. Don't rewrite history by saying that we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the World Creole Festival when we know that it started on about 1997. Don't whitewash or try to eviscerate the achievements of those you don't like. It is a wonderful world, but it is not a world that, quite frankly, has been given to you as a personal possession. Accept your responsibility with dignity and with honesty and with integrity, not as a means or an opportunity to become filthy rich at the expense and on the backs of your people. If you pay homage to these principles, overarching principles, then the Caribbean will in fact be a zone of peace, because you would have no hesitation or reluctance to deal with those evils that are destroying Dominica, irrespective of who is your friend or who is not your friend, because your only friend should be the people that you serve. And if you adhere to these principles, then quite frankly, there will be no need to pronounce. We are in a zone of peace because your actions would provide the very evidence that in fact we will be and we will continue to be a zone of peace where people live peacefully with each other as opposed to people exploiting each other for their own selfish interests. But fortunately, we have hope that those principles will govern and will supersede those other selfish principles that unfortunately is eating away like a cancer at the body politic in Dominica. I thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Andre. Thank you, Dr. Thompson Fontaine. Thank you, former Ambassador Crispin Gregoire. Thank you ever so much for all of the listeners who've been listeners from everywhere, on the radio, on the internet, we're streaming. And thank you so much for the folks on Facebook and YouTube for being with us all this time tonight. Thank you for your contributions. And it's all left to me now just to say good night to everybody. Have a very pleasant evening. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
The Global Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from. Understanding our past. Embracing our present. Charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty. Embracing justice, peace, and together.